The real estate industry is the world's single largest contributor to climate change. At Fifth Wall, we're on a mission to help the industry eradicate its carbon emissions and build to zero.
There's a huge amount of goodwill towards tiny homes. There really is. It's this affordable housing model that I think of as like a spear point to kind of pierce through NIMBYism. And it really has successfully done that. It's in comparison with other affordable housing options and models, there is drastically less resistance to tiny homes than there are apartment buildings or complexes or mobile home parks, right? So this is an important tool that advocates need to be looking at. Tiny homes have this ability to be an affordable housing option because they're actually being welcomed into communities. And that's really, really important, right?
And the reason for that, just to understand that, is that it's just a more desirable neighbor to have a tiny home than it is to have affordable housing or manufactured housing. Is that really what's driving it?
I mean, I think that it's just a little less threatening. So all of our country, cities are opening up to accessory dwelling units, and it's considered kind of the most gentle form of urban density. And essentially, a tiny home is no different than the typical accessory dwelling unit. And that's kind of a fully functioning standalone unit, only it's on a trailer, right? So basically, that's why I feel like there actually at this time, there's a huge amount of goodwill on all sides. And it really is just a matter of educating people who are interested, who are kind of city planners and commissioners and mayors, of this dynamic in terms of that there's this really great housing option, but we can't utilize it because there's no specific legal avenues for people to build to these standards.
And is this kind of, an example of, the private sector, right? And consumers innovating and creating demand for products that do solve, needs, their needs, but also society's needs around affordable housing, around lowering the cost of living in, cities that are becoming increasingly, inhospitable to, certain incomes. So there's kind of this private sector solution that just doesn't fit congruently into any of the existing paradigms. And, the public sector is just too brittle to adapt to it. Is that kind of what's happening here?
I mean, that's a really apt way to put it. It's that there is this tool, this product, right, that's been identified that has a vast demand for it, right? And the public sector has definitely identified this. It's kind of a mom and pop industry, but definitely the big players have already identified the potential of tiny homes, right? But there's this like governmental regulation that's getting in the way of the private sector actually being able to develop housing solution. And I think the reason, you can point to the kind of consumerist society, you can point to the regulatory obstacles, this kind of like it doesn't fit into a neat place, so it's a little bit more work. But I think what really is keeping people from acting and changing the laws is that people don't really believe that it's going to have much effect on either affordable housing options or climate. Right? They would do it, but it's just kind of a bit of work, and they just don't believe it's really going to have that much effect. And that's why I think it's really important to have these conversations to really dissect what this tool really is and how it can serve society. And if you talk to economists, they essentially point to the fact that we have not been building enough housing to keep up with the demand in the last 10 years, right? And they put that number somewhere at around 4 million homes that we need to be building.
That's the structural shortfall, meaning that's the number of homes that we should have built over the last decade but didn't.
That's right. And that would have kept this appreciation housing, the appreciation at a better clip, so that it wouldn't have gotten so unaffordable and so unattainable for so many Americans, right? What I believe is that you have to look at not only building homes, but you have to build the type of homes that people need. And in order to do that, you have to look at how our demographics have been shifting so drastically over the last 4 decades. And to give an illustration of what I mean by this is that today, single people are almost 50% of our country. So single people and married couples without children represent 3/4 of our population, and nuclear families is only 20%. So what we have is we have a housing stock that essentially has been built in opposite of that, where 75% of the housing in our country essentially is constructed for the needs of a nuclear family. And so to me, it's like we need to start building housing that's appropriate for the need. And what it's led to is essentially just a huge amount of Americans living in large homes by themselves. Essentially, it's like we're using our existing housing stock extremely inefficiently. And when you point to, okay, how can tiny homes help us in terms of our energy demand of our country? That's a really big one, because we can solve the housing crisis two ways. We can keep building just more and more large homes and keep putting more people into these large homes. And that's going to maybe get people housed and solve the need for housing. But that's constructing large and large homes, where we could essentially build smaller places that a lot of the people that are living in homes by themselves are older Americans, and give those older Americans desirable ways to downsize and essentially increase the numbers of homes in the housing supply simply by utilizing our housing stock more efficiently.
Once you build a larger home than the market needs, the energy cost, right? And how consumptive that is, from a carbon perspective, it doesn't go away. You can't put that genie back in the bottle once you've built that big home. And so you're effectively amortizing all that embodied carbon in that asset over years and years and years. So it's interesting because, it's like many things in the climate crisis, the decisions we make right now are consequential, and we're going to be paying down for years and decades. And I guess your point is that really being an advocate for tiny homes will have huge downstream consequences on both the affordable housing crisis, but also, the climate crisis.
And I think that the last piece that I believe would motivate cities or policymakers to really take tiny homes seriously and tiny homes in backyards is the dynamic in terms of what mobility does to the implication or implementation of these types of units for affordable housing. And when I say that, I mean the mobility breaks up that dynamic where the property owner has to pay 100% for the ADU in the backyard. So ADUs typically do not get put on the rental market in high numbers at all. And it's essentially because people who can afford another construction project and their mortgage don't typically have that incentive to rent out their backyard. Allowing tiny homes in backyards does another really important thing for our country, and it empowers people who want to be support structures for friends and family that are falling on hard times. It empowers them to do that in a way that's reasonable for their life. And what I mean by that is that if you are falling on hard times and you want to sleep on my couch, well, there's an inherent intrusion to that. And even if I have an extra room, you're still in my space, in my house. And my wife is only going to tolerate it for so long, right? And even if I love you as a brother, at some point, I'm going to say, this is enough. If you could have a tiny home in my backyard, your ability to stay with me, my ability to be a support structure for you is so much greater. And for every homeless person in our country, I guarantee, some people have no friends and no family, and they have no connections. And that's greatly sad. But the vast majority all have people in their lives, friends and families, whose hearts are, broken because every day they know that this person is just in this place of misery and they have no ability in their mind to assist them. So if we want to do something about homelessness, and we want to do it in a way that doesn't just concentrate all the people of the lowest economic spectrum into shelters and to these villages, a good way to do it would be empower their loved ones to give them some help.
Right. And enfranchise that capital. And obviously, you have also the downstream benefits of what that does psychologically to the individual, but also what that does downstream for the environment and for the local economy.
And that brings us back to mobility, right? Because mobility is the key there. Because if you're falling on hard times, for me to go and, construct a tiny home in my backyard on a permanent foundation, that's a committed move. And that means you're going to be in my backyard for a long time, right? And the whole goal is to get you back on your feet and maybe get you out of there. So mobility, having that mobility means that that's actually a massively positive thing for our society. And I think part of what we've been fighting against is just this deeply entrenched notion of just skepticism and suspicion towards people that are unrooted, towards human cultures and nomadic tribes, right? That didn't have home bases, right? So in societies, we've never been very accommodating for this kind of group.
Yeah.
And what I believe is that, obviously the world's changed, modern people are traveling much more. People are staying in their homes a lot less, a lot shorter times, right? And moving more frequently in their lives, and to me, I think just allowing homes to be transportable or movable is really a response to the needs of modern society.